Yes, I should have included the link to GitHub. So yeah, short answer is yes. And I think I mentioned at the beginning, there's 3 great software engineers, data scientists at the Flatiron Institute that we're working with to, make it even better and more accessible. But it's, bandwidth limited as always. Yeah.
Yeah, great set of talks, guys. This is fantastic. You're all doing really cool work. And I was wondering, maybe particularly, I'm also, I guess, biased and personally very excited about musculoskeletal modeling. So I thought I'd go from the sensory side, so I love the motor side. We should hook it up together. That sounds great. But aside from that, I was just wondering, because I'm very excited about this push in biomechanics, like the Myo suite and things. So have you thought about making like a benchmark for this, or putting in some of these neural behavioral type of benchmarks together? I think that could be super exciting.
That would be amazing. Let's do it. I was really inspired by all the benchmark talks today, and I think we really need that more, especially on the motor side, but in general. So yeah, I would love to do that.
Yeah, Myo suite is great. I'm sure you know about it, but
yeah,
really cool.
yeah, exactly. Great idea.
So I'm going to use that word benchmark to ask this question. All of you kind of were doing benchmarks of different kinds in different ways. And one of the questions that comes up as you're modeling the systems in different ways is the complexity of the model itself. So with my software engineering hat on, I say MVP, low complexity models, MVP +1, keep increasing the complexity of the models to achieve something towards a brain model. So one of the questions I have is, how do you see creating benchmarks that improve the understanding of the model itself?
Also, I think one idea there might be what we briefly picked up on in the session yesterday, which is to guide the experiments based on model discrimination. So right now it's more of this, like, let's just show a bunch of images or other stimuli, but we could put the model against each other. Like, let's say you have 2 competing models that both score similarly well on current experimental data. You can now figure out which one of them is more correct, and you could automate this whole process. So, like, I don't know, every month or so you run a new experiment where you discriminate between the top competing models and figure out, like, which direction that models are taking, which sort of gradient is currently the most correct one. I think that's the engineering approach that I could see working out.
And would that help in kind of helping us think about how to define benchmarks?
Yeah, I mean, ideally this is all a cycle, right? Like, ideally data guiding constrained models, and then the models make predictions, and then we sort of, that's just scientific cycle. I think if we can scale that up and make that be more efficient, we would make more progress.
Adding to that, and potentially also addressing your complexity question, I mean, I think it is a very important question to keep in mind, and maybe some of the metrics would also take that into account. Like, we want the minimal or simplest model possible that can actually, maybe we disagree, that can actually, potentially reproduce neural data or the kinds of other metrics that we're looking for. Yeah, I would say maybe the simplest possible model, but
without losses in alignment.
Right. So what are the trade-offs, right? I think it would be really great to quantify those trade-offs, so that could be one of another metric to actually add to this. How complex is that model?
Yeah, our field first has to define what complexity is, and I think there's no good answer right now. Like, we can count parameters, but I don't think that's very meaningful.
Okay, I'll say something maybe slightly controversial to end it, is that I see the value in benchmarks, but I wouldn't describe what I do as creating benchmarks. And I think benchmarks aren't everything, especially when it comes to kind of like unsupervised analysis. So Hannah's talk, I think, was a very, it was really nice contribution, because it shows just how many different kinds of approaches are out there, and you're looking at exploring data, and you don't have like a quantitative number that says, yes, like this particular method is the one that works best, so I'm just going to take this and publish it. I need to think about, what is the hypothesis, what kind of structure am I looking for, do I have a hypothesis that I'm testing, and what is each one of these methods designed to to pull out. So I think especially if you're thinking about things from an unsupervised perspective, which I often do, benchmarks, I don't know if they're actually the right tool to compare methods like that.
And I will touch on that now, which is, I think that this gets back to your final question at the end, which is ISOMAP with a very few number of dimensions was able to fit 95% of the data. But as I said at the end of my talk, it's kind of how can we extract meaning from that? Like, okay, I hit the 95% benchmark, but what does it actually do for me? And maybe it does something, but if it does, I don't know what it is yet, so.
Just following up on that, your talk really kind of highlighted this aspect of unsupervised methods. Often, what we're looking for, or what the field is looking for, is interpretability in the actual potentially latent dimensions or whatever kind of aspect you're looking at. But it's very difficult to quantify interpretability because it's based on the human who's actually observing it, and so that's where I think benchmarking studies kind of fail, because how do you actually put that on the table? How interpretable it is. So decoding is one way, and I actually may differ from Alex in here that I do think you can at least try to quantify those things, and we are all comparing our results against something, so it is benchmarking in some sense.
I was going to soften my statement a little bit by saying, one of the things I showed you was like predicting an animal's behavior using the approach that I built up, and that was a really useful kind of, you could call it a sanity check or whatever, but I think we need both. We need supervised and unsupervised methods, and it's really difficult to benchmark unsupervised methods.
Yeah, sort of in defense of benchmarks, I don't think they're everything, but our field right now is really barely doing anything in that direction. Like I think Mackenzie was making this point too in the morning. One reason that machine learning is doing so well, like they're sharing all the data, they're making it all accessible. There's a very clear metric that you can follow. There's a clear leaderboard. We can argue if the metrics they're using are not correct, but like our field is not even at the stage of discussing whether we're using the right ways to compare models to data. So I think like doing at least more of that in addition to interpretability and everything else we like to do would improve the state of affairs.
Should I continue to? Because I think I agree. So.
Last reply, then we go back to the audience.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I was just gonna throw it out there that I think the machine learning community is doing extremely well at supervised learning, but they're not doing a great job at interpreting. Like machine learning or deep learning interpretability, I think is still in its very early stages. So I think that is a little bit more akin to what at least part of the neuroscience community is striving for. And I don't know if machine learning is the model we want to look for that set of questions. But I agree with you that like there are certain things that we do need to benchmark, and that's very important. So I appreciate your contributions, but just trying to add some complexity.
Do you think should we or should we not do better QA of input data? In a sense, let's say if you look at an IBL mouse, right? You said, oh, it takes the different time for them to learn. But it's not even that. Some mice, they just, sabotage, right? Your training because they learn and then they stop performing, right? And then they kind of behave again, right? So those samples, fMRI, half of the subjects might have fallen asleep, right? So that the activity might have nothing to do with the stimuli. To develop those nice benchmarks and models, right? Should we or should we not maybe do better QA of the data so data is cleaner or more representative of what we are actually thinking it is?
I'd say yes. It's maybe an oversimplification to just look at a learning curve, or just to take the example that you showed. It would be nice to know, is this mouse performing the task well, or is it actually a good performer, but it was just asleep on that day? You would want to have a rich metadata set, which I think has come up in other sessions.
I think this was also addressed by you, Mackenzie. But whose responsibility is that, I think, would be my question for that. I mean, I think it might also be the people who are contributing that input data, right? So potentially it's a community effort to be able to do this. And I think yeah, resources need to be devoted to something like this. Comes back to the panel discussion of the last session, I think.
All right, this is fun. It's definitely the boxing match. But let's, for the interest of time, let's move and have 10-minute break, have coffee, refuel, and come back, and we'll definitely bring that up in the later conversation.
Thank you all for the questions.